At this stage, it's very difficult to tell how easy or difficult it's going to be. We know, for example, that many of the European Union states are very opposed to this move. They see this as a direct challenge to their decision to recognize the Declaration of Independence. And so that we know that there's going to be a large body of support from the European Union, from the United States, and from those countries that have recognized the Declaration of Independence against this move. But that's only 46 countries. So really, we're talking about the other 150 or so, where they're going to fall. I think that what we're going to see is that there is going to be substantial support for the Serbian move. However, a lot of the countries that have recognized independence will be putting pressure on those other countries which haven't made a decision yet. And so I really think at this stage it's rather difficult to tell how this is going to play out.
Serbia is requesting the United Nations to ask the International Court of Justice to give an opinion about that matter. Is that institution the only one relevant for this subject?
Well, essentially on a legal platform, yes, it is. Politically, obviously, there's all sorts of other institutions which are important, the United Nations, but also other memberships of other organizations. And we could be talking about the OSCE, for example, the Council of Europe, the International Olympic Committee. All of these are areas where political recognition is afforded. But the International Court of Justice is considered to be the world's legal the most serious and most important legal institution. And it is worth pointing out, though, and this has been mentioned elsewhere, that the decision taken by the ICJ will not be legally binding. Members of the United Nations aren't required to accept the ruling of the ICJ, but they will. It will carry a lot of moral authority. And so I think what we will see is that a lot of countries won't want to recognize after that.
Can you enumerate some breaches of international law you believe the Declaration of Independence of Kosovo is responsible for?
Well, quite clearly. I mean, international politics has worked on the assumption that there is the right of territorial integrity of states. Now, we talk about the sovereign right of states to have that territorial integrity respected, but we also talk of self-determination of peoples. And many people say, oh, well, the Kosovo Albanians should have had the right to independence because of self-determination. But we don't recognize a universal right of self-determination in international law. In fact, the terms of self-determination are very, very limited. Since 1945, we have only recognized the right of self-determination in cases of decolonization, and crucially, even then, only at the moment of decolonization. So once a state is created because the colonial powers of Europe left a territory, for example, in Africa or in Asia, you couldn't then have further subdivisions of that territory. So it was a very narrowly applied principle. And what we've essentially done, and trying to argue that Kosovo is a unique case, sui generis in international law, not many people take this particularly seriously. And that is why only 46 countries have recognized. And we must also recognize that the majority of those countries did so under a lot of pressure from key members of the European Union and from the United States. And we're talking about a couple of small Pacific island states with only a few thousand inhabitants. We're talking about small, impoverished African nations, which are very dependent on aid from the United States and the European Union. So apart from a core of Western states, the vast majority of the world has very grave concerns about what has happened in Kosovo and don't believe that Kosovo merits the criteria necessary to be granted independence.
How do you feel about some warnings coming from the European Union towards Serbia regarding this request? For example, Great Britain and France are strongly against such a request. For example, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bernard Kouchner, said actually that Belgrade's move was surprising, especially with Serbia's EU membership aspirations. And I quote, he says, if that court were to declare the independence illegal, it would be unusual that Serbia would want to join illegality, and that there is some contradiction there. It's an interesting statement. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think there are several points to consider in this. One, I think it's absolutely vital to remember that it is not the European Union that has recognized the Declaration of Independence. It is the vast majority of the members of the European Union. We still have 6 countries, Cyprus, Greece, Slovakia, Portugal, Spain, and I'm trying to remember, Romania, which haven't recognized the Declaration of Independence and are very opposed to the independence of Kosovo. So I think that to argue that this is a European Union position is wrong, and for that reason Serbia cannot be forced to recognize that Declaration of Independence in order to become a member of the European Union. One of the key principles of EU membership is that you cannot set extra conditions for new applicant members which are not conditions and which don't apply to the members that are currently there. So as long as we have countries that don't recognize Kosovo's independence, then it is not actually correct for the European Union to make that a formal demand for membership. And the French government knows that, and a lot of governments have said this openly. The Germans have come out and said, look, we don't make Kosovo recognition dependent on a cause for Serbia to become a member of the European Union. A lot of countries agree. The other issue to do with the European Union's position is that this actually, the pressure that's been put on Serbia actually raises very real questions. Does the EU know or have real doubts about the legality of what it's doing? Has it done this in order to try and prevent Serbia from taking it to court? Because they actually know in themselves that what they did by recognizing it was not legal under international law. There are also other questions that, we've spent so many years trying to put pressure on Serbia to respect international politics, to respect international law in its dealings with its neighbors. And now that it's actually chosen to adopt the path of peace and go before an international court, we're trying to put pressure on them not to do so, looks very, very bad. And I think is a very bad signal that, we keep saying in the European Union, we believe in international law, we believe that all issues must be settled peacefully and according to international law. And now we're trying to say to a country, well, that's not actually the case. We don't believe that you should have the right to do it. And I think, again, this is something that the rest of the world will look at and will actually accuse the European Union of hypocrisy if it takes this too far. That the European Union is trying to persuade other countries to abide by international law and is trying to get various international institutions like the International Criminal Court respected around the world. And here it is now trying to prevent a country which aspires to EU membership from actually going before those institutions of international justice. So I think the European Union has to be extremely careful in how they manage this. And I think that particular members of the European Union have got to be careful not to be seen to be putting too much pressure on Serbia.